It's the Daily Drop from SHW Off-Road, and I'm Jake Tillman, your host. Today we are talking about solid axle vehicle lifts and probably dispelling some just wrong thoughts that are often associated with lifts. We're going to talk about the things you can adjust as far as what an alignment means on a lifted vehicle with solid axles front and rear. Mainly we're going to stick in Jeeps. When I talk about some of this stuff, many of the principles are gonna also translate to other solid axle vehicles, but my experience, my background is all Jeeps, so some of the rules may not apply to some of these other vehicles, but it's gonna almost always apply to, four link setups front and rear. So let's dive right in. Solid axle lifts. I see this all the time in groups. People talk about lifting their Jeep, their Gladiator, their JK, their whatever, their TJ, they lift it and they start talking about alignment, but their lift is either just spacers or they just do springs and shocks, and they don't even have the proper equipment to really even do a true alignment. So we're going to talk about what an alignment means, what can be adjusted on an alignment in a four-link kind of setup, and the equipment required. Now, this is just, glazing the surface. I'm not a suspension expert. I know people that are, so we're going to do a more in-depth conversation about it in the future. But today, I think we're going to go down the path to get you started to at least do some research and make a more educated buying decision and just make more educated actions when it comes to a lifted Jeep. But what can you adjust when it comes to the alignment of your solid axle vehicle or a Jeep? Number one, you can adjust your caster and your pinion angle. Now, those two things, they are related. When you adjust one, it affects the other. In general, this is not a hard, fast rule. Pinion angle takes precedent over caster. And here's why. Pinion angle will affect how your drive line behaves. It can literally have catastrophic effects on the rest of your powertrain, right? So your pinion angle at your differential is on your axle housing. It's the center section, and your pinion angle is the angle in relation to your transfer case and the yokes on each. And if your pinion angle is way out, it's going to cause serious vibrations and do some serious damage to your transfer case and other things. And when a drive shaft goes in four-wheel drive, your front drive shaft can do some serious damage to other components. We're talking, your oil pans right there, transmission, stuff like that. So pinion angle is super, super important. That's not to say that caster isn't important, but caster really, it affects how your vehicle behaves, as far as steering and how your suspension behaves after bumps. If your caster's way out, you're going to feel it, and it can be dangerous, but usually pinion angle is going to take precedence. And often you make a compromise that slightly favors pinion angle, but also gets your caster dialed in so that your vehicle behaves in a way that it should on the road for the most part. Okay, so how do you adjust it? You got to have adjustable control arms. Okay, if you put a lift on your vehicle and you stick with the stock arms, the stock control arms, front, upper, and lower, you cannot adjust this. Okay, it is set from the factory and it cannot be moved. You can only adjust it with either, and I didn't mention this before, you can do drop brackets. I think you can do bolts too, maybe caster adjustment bolts, but drop brackets or different arms, whether those are fixed or adjustable. That's the only way you can adjust your pinion angle and caster. If you're going with adjustable arms and you're only going to choose one, typically in the front, you go with your lower, and your lower is what is used to adjust your pinion angle. You push it out or pull it in to adjust accordingly. If you're going to replace your uppers and your lowers, the general rule of thumb is your lower typically is used to just position the axle in the wheel well and position the axle relative of the vehicle body and the frame, whereas the upper you then use to adjust your pinion angle. But there's different approaches to alignments, but no matter what, in order to do an alignment properly and to actually adjust your caster and your pinion angle, you have to have either adjustable arms, new arms that are the proper length for your lift height, or some drop brackets. Okay, now typically a lot of people like to say if you're under 2.5 inches on a Jeep, usually you can get away without having to adjust your caster very much or your pinion angle. You don't get serious vibrations with that little of a height, right? The more you lift your vehicle, the more the angles at your drive shafts are going to change, and your pinion angle is going to be greatly affected the higher you lift your vehicle. So a lot of people say 2.5 inches, you really don't need to look at arms. I slightly disagree with that. I feel like my vehicle, my Jeep, before I had control arms, the steering was really squirrely. I feel like it wandered quite a bit. And as soon as I added lower control arms and dialed in my caster a bit, while also keeping in mind my pinion angle, the vehicle behaved a totally different way. I only have like 2.5, maybe 2 inches of lift. I run an old man Emo BP51 setup. So I only have a couple inches of lift, but I have control arms all around, because I have felt the difference that control arms can make. I also needed control arms in the rear because I've got an LS in my two-door Jeep, and I needed those control arms to dial in pinion angle in the rear as well, because again, vibrations can be really, really bad. But that's number one, caster pinion angle, and that's what you need in order to adjust it. Number two is toe. The toe is the alignment of your front. Center my hands in the mirror. The alignment of your front wheels in or out at the front of your vehicle. And the nice thing about toe, it's one of the few things that you can actually adjust from the factory, right? So this is one of the only, there's this and one other thing you can adjust without replacing any other components when you do like either a puck lift, a spacer lift, or you do springs and coils and nothing else. So you adjust it at the tie rod. The tie rod is adjustable from the factory on Jeeps, on JKs. That might differ depending on your vehicle make and model. But your toe can be adjusted. And it depends on the vehicle, kind of where your toe should be. Generally, you want it just a bit in. I use tape measure to do my adjustment. I think I have mine set at right around an 1/8 or a 16th in. But a lot of people use degrees too, as far as actual alignments and stuff. And I'm not going to get too deep into that. But in order to adjust your toe, you got to have an adjustable tie rod, and most vehicles are equipped with that from the factory. So that is something you can usually do, even if you just do like a spacer lift. Number three is centering the steering wheel. That is part of your alignment. That is also something that you can do on a Jeep from the factory. Your drag link is what affects how your steering wheel is centered, and it has to be centered. You really need to center it, otherwise your ABS is going to go haywire. Sorry, not your ABS, but your traction control, because it thinks you're turning harder than you actually are in certain scenarios. So that's another one that you can do straight from the factory. You don't actually need usually replacement parts to adjust, the centering of your steering wheel. At least that's the case in a Jeep JK. Might be different in other models. Do your research, but you need an adjustable drag link in order to adjust the centering of your steering wheel. Number four, the last one, which you cannot do in most stock vehicles, and that is centering your axle. Centering your axle can really help how your vehicle tracks, especially on the highway. It helps your front and your rear axle get in center and helps them get in center with each other in the frame. And it'll help your vehicle behave better down the road. It's much more forgiving usually. Centering an axle is more forgiving. It's not as unsafe as maybe some of the other alignment principles as far as aligning a solid axle vehicle, but it affects tire wear, it affects your handling on the highway and stuff like that. So you need to adjust it. And the only way to adjust it is to have adjustable track bars. Okay, that is the only way in most cases to center the axles underneath the vehicle. You can also use brackets, I think, that account for this, that move the mounting hole for the track bar, and so it relocates it. Usually it raises it up as well for other geometry principles that we're not going to talk about today. But it also moves it over so that the axle then comes in line with the frame in the other components in your drive line. So there you go. In a nutshell, there's a lot of info there. I flew through it. Go back, watch it again if you need to. I wish I was a little more organized in my delivery of it, but I think there's some great info there. If you have something to add, drop it in the comments. If you have questions, drop it in the comments. Let us know. We're here to help. We'd love to learn with you. If you've got a correction to make, if there's something I misspoke on, let me know. I'm here to learn as well. And again, we're going to have a much more in-depth conversation about this with some serious experts in the near future. So join us down the road. But tomorrow we're going to talk about fridges, particularly when it comes to trailer. Should you put your fridge in your trailer or in your vehicle? We're going to talk about that tomorrow. So join me tomorrow. Otherwise, thanks again for watching today. All right.